And that's probably the key domino that if you can unlock that, everything else becomes easier, right? So then it's easier to optimize your sleep. It's easier to de-stress. It's easier to have meal prep. It's easier to do all the things you're supposed to do. But the issue is, why aren't you doing it?
Hello, listeners, and welcome to M26 Fit, the podcast that powers your spirit, mind, and body. I'm Magnus Olsson, and thank you for joining us today as we dive into stories and strategies from top athletes, health experts, and everyday warriors. We're here to inspire and challenge you to become the strongest, fittest, and healthiest version of yourself inside and out. So hit the subscribe button and let's get cracking on yet another exciting episode. Today, we're sitting down with a man who's pushing the limits of human performance, not through brute strength, but through science, discipline, and deep self-awareness. Richard Game is a former athlete, a physiotherapist, and now a leading voice in functional health, performance coaching, and biohacking. He's built the wellness system inside elite clubs like Total Fusion Platinum, before creating Evolved Health, a cutting-edge health optimization business designed to help people live longer, feel stronger, and operate at their absolute best. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Mate, to kick us off, mate, what is Evolved Health and how do you help people?
Sure. So Evolved Health is basically the method or framework that I've developed over many, many years, almost decades now of working within the health industry, that I've put together to create, I guess, a system of how to improve and optimize health, whether you're dealing with chronic conditions and chronic disease, all the way up to health optimization, longevity, biohacking, all that fun stuff. So basically a full framework to address all of that. How I help people is, I guess, leveraging that framework to then coach and I guess empower people in how to improve and optimize their own health. Again, whether it's they're dealing with chronic conditions or they're just seeking to improve and optimize.
Do you remember, take us back to the beginning, where did that journey start for you, where you really wanted to have a passion for getting into that health space?
Yeah, this question is always interesting. I've got a very roundabout way, I guess, of my life, of how I've come around things. I think I've always been interested in optimization, performance, and that type of stuff. I was always an athlete as a kid. So I was very fortunate that my dad was very athletic. You know, he was doing bodybuilding, he was in the military, he played hockey, he did lots of stuff. So I grew up with that as a role model. And so typical.
That's not a bad role model.
It's a pretty good role model. It's the typical thing of like a young kid who, you know, your dad is Superman. Like that was the image of my dad growing up. And so I always had that influence. So I think I was quite lucky in that I was exposed to, you know, health and fitness from a young age. And typical Canadian, playing ice hockey pretty much most of my career, but always into sports. So off season during summer was soccer, or I was doing tennis or basketball, or I was always doing something. And so that's probably the early foray into, you know, fitness and performance and, you know, team sports, all of that stuff. You learn a lot about yourself and working with others. But then that progressed as I went on. I moved out of hockey eventually after high school. It was kind of the, you know, go pro option or don't and switch. I probably wasn't of the level to go pro, to be honest. And so I shifted gears a little bit into martial arts. And that opened up my world a lot because it was totally new. I put myself in a new environment. It was something I wanted to try. And so I had to basically, you know, rebuild myself, learn something new from there. I got a personal trainer and a performance coach. That opened up even more. And then from there, you know, if you're going to go into fighting, you need to make sure your recovery is good, make sure your nutrition is good. You need to start thinking about all those things because, yeah, you get in the ring. And if that's not all tip-top shape, then you're going to be in some trouble. And so that's probably where a lot of it was introduced. And then that expanded into more academic pursuits later in life. I went into university much later. There's probably a chapter of my life that I've left out in that we had a family business always. So I was kind of always exposed to that world. I did that for a while, but decided I didn't want to pursue the family business. Went back to school to pursue what I liked. I did sort of like a pre-med human movement sciences approach. And then during that time was doing PT, eventually exercise physiology, strength and conditioning, did my nutrition cert. So I was doing nutrition as well. And then I was just always trying to improve and optimize across all areas. Eventually, through that process, you know, thinking like everyone else does as far as what you're going to do after your undergrad. And so I had a couple options on the table. I wanted to try and get into something sooner rather than later. And so if I wanted to go medicine or naturopathic medicine, it would have probably been another year of undergrad. and plus another 5 years med school, or I could go physio at the time, and that would have been right away, and just 2 years and I could get into clinical practice and start learning more. So went down that path and got into physio. But all during this time, I was also studying other things on my own. So I started studying functional medicine at that time. And
maybe just describe to our listeners, what's functional medicine?
Sure. I guess the easiest way to think about it is comparing against the conventional approach. And I don't always love, outlining it that way because it's not necessarily a dichotomy of one versus the other. I like to see it as a cohesive approach. But conventional medicine, the way it was developed, really around the time of infectious disease and those types of treatments that were, one treatment for one condition. And so it's a very reactive based model. If you have a disease, we can treat the disease. But it usually, quote unquote, treated it through addressing symptoms, not necessarily getting to the root cause. And so what functional medicine does is it changes that paradigm a little bit to focus on root cause. So what is actually causing the symptoms and what is the cause of the disease?
It's a proactive approach versus reactive.
Yeah, exactly. And then, bring in aspects of preventative care, holistic care, thinking about the whole body, not just one system. Conventional medicine tends to be a bit reductionist, which is good. Like we need that. We want specialists. If I have a heart attack and I need, triple bypass, I want the most specialist I can possibly find and the highest expert in heart surgeries for that. That's great. But the issue is in the modern day, we have all this growing disparity of chronic disease, which are multifactorial. It's not one thing. There's many factors, lifestyle, and that's not conducive to being treated with a reductionist approach. And so functional medicine is really born out of a need of addressing this chronic disease epidemic for the most part. Not to say it can't help other things like heart disease and whatnot, but that's really where the paradigm is quite different. And again, it's sort of taking a bigger picture out and viewing the whole body. From a medical perspective, it utilizes things like systems biology. So the opposite of a reductionist approach to medicine would be a systems-based approach. So, your endocrine system, for example, doesn't function in a silo. Your endocrine system being your hormones, right? It's influenced by your brain, by your nervous system, by your gut, by everything else. And so if you only look at the hormone system in isolation without thinking about all these other systems, you often miss the mark. And so that's really, a long way of saying what functional medicine really tries to address.
So you've obviously got a very broad background, personally as an athlete, and then obviously physiotherapist. And then I believe that you were the general manager for Total Fusion Platinum and building their wellness facilities in a number of gyms around.
Yeah. So I was there from the early days when it was really just a vision of what they wanted to create on the wellness side. I knew the founders prior. I was actually treating Leon and the family. And so, we had a couple of chats and I think our vision aligned of what we saw the future of wellness and health improvement was. And so I came on board to help them build up the wellness division, which was, bringing on a full team, creating the protocols, the systems, processes, all those types of things. So it was, leveraging different and disparate areas of my background and knowledge. And what I didn't touch on as well is I've had my own health issues through all these journeys as well. And so that's probably sparked a lot of my learning. And so I'm always trying to, for myself, think about how do I improve and optimize health and then expand that into helping others. So I was taking that and trying to create a model that is going to, reshape how health and wellness was sort of approached in Australia.
Yeah. So was there any particular learnings that you got from that experience with Total Fusion that you've taken into your own business now, Evolved Health?
Yeah, they're very different business models, and it's probably set that way on purpose. So for those who are familiar with Total Fusion and what they're doing, they're massive facilities, multiple locations, big teams, very complex businesses. And that was exciting. It was great. I loved it. I love building a team. I love leadership. I love all of that. But then, with that comes more overhead, more expenses, more time, more meetings, just more management, right? And so probably one of the takeaways is trying to think about from a business perspective of simpler business models, from a health and wellness perspective. And maybe this crosses over with business as well. What I found interesting was the aspect of marketing. And so even for health and medicine, the marketing and PR side of it really matters. You could have, the latest and greatest technology. You could have the best protocols. You can have all the science, but that's not necessarily what people resonate with. You've got to find that emotional cue, the storytelling, the things that are going to bring them in. And so that's probably been one of my biggest learnings just across my whole journey of figuring out how do we engage people and bring them in to help them improve and optimize their own health. Because there's a lot of people that need it and they either don't know they need it or they do, but they just, for whatever reason, they're not committing or they're not sticking to it or something there. And I think that's an ongoing issue within healthcare, at large.
So when a client walks into your office now, what's the most common complaint that you get and what's the first lever that you pull?
There can be so many levers. I think what I see a lot of now is probably the, syndrome of burnout. I think that's super common. I see a lot of guys, women as well. I just tend to get quite a few kind of high performing men that come through and they're all sort of on that spectrum of burnout. And that's not a diagnosis per se. It's usually a multitude of symptoms that people have. So they're fatigued, their energy's low, their motivation's low. Maybe there's signs like, their hormones are dropping, their mood's not very good. And things are just not looking great. That's probably what I see the most of. And part of that's probably due to what society is sort of like at the moment, all the stressors.
What do you think the biggest barrier is for people nowadays that prevents them from prioritising their health? I know, obviously, I'm just like yourself, very, very much that my health is my priority. But obviously, for a lot of these people, what do you see those biggest barriers are for people?
It's a good question. I think that's the question really for everyone. As I said, a lot of people, they either don't know they need something or they're aware, but they're not taking action. I bounce back and forth between a couple of things. One is going deeper into their underlying why. If you don't have a why as to what you're doing, then it's very easy to fall off, right? Oh, I'm doing this for some extrinsic reward. And then when that reward's gone, I just go back to my old habits versus the aspect of an intrinsic, motivator. So are you doing this for a family or because you want to be there for your kids or your grandkids? So I think sometimes people don't necessarily understand what their why is. And so they don't have the consistency with it. The other aspect is perhaps just developing discipline as you need. And that is something that can be developed. But I think a lot of people struggle perhaps to develop. And some people naturally have it. Like, the high performer, entrepreneur, exec, whatever, they're over the top sometimes. But I think for a lot of people, they lack that general discipline. And that's probably the key domino that if you can unlock that, everything else becomes easier, right? So then it's easier to optimize your sleep. It's easier to de-stress. It's easier to have meal prep. It's easier to do all the things you're supposed to do. But the issue is, why aren't you doing it?
Is sunlight a big one, do you think?
Definitely. Yeah. Huge one. And it was interesting moving to Australia and learning slip, slop, slap here because there's a huge aversion to sunlight. And we're learning more and more about how important it is for optimal health. We have the whole area of circadian biology. So for those who aren't familiar, the circadian rhythm is your internal 24-hour kind of clock. And because we live on this planet at this distance from the sun, that's just how we revolve around. Basically, all life on this planet revolves around these circadian rhythms. And there's other ones too, ultradian and other concepts. But what we're learning now is how that basically shapes all aspects of our health, right? Cancer risk, even we're learning now, if you have disrupted circadian rhythm, higher cancer risk. Neurodegenerative disease, if you don't sleep, if you're getting 6 hours or less a night consistently, higher likelihood of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all those types of things. So super, super important that we're getting that light from a circadian perspective. But then obviously things like vitamin D, we know is going to be really important. But it's a balancing act between not burning yourself and getting sun exposure. And I think that's where we went wrong. Australia sort of went overboard on the aversion to the sun without a more thoughtful approach of safe and appropriate sun exposure. Yeah.
And you mentioned sleep and you mentioned 6 hours. How much sleep should we be getting every night? And how important is sleep to our overall health and performance?
Yeah. So the general recommendation is 7 to 9 hours. So minimum being 7. Anything 6 or less is considered insufficient sleep. If you're getting into 6 or 5 hours less, we're going into kind of insomnia areas. So really aiming for that 7 to 9 hours. And then, as I highlighted, the risks are very apparent now. If you're not getting that consistent sleep, then we know there's going to be detriments to long-term health. But even from a performance perspective, and this is one thing that's been great about, sports science in the last 5 to 10 years, probably even longer than that now, is we know that even short-term sleep deficit has massive implications on performance. So your risk for injury is higher. Things like reaction time and cognitive thinking. So if you're in team sports or anything where you got to move and think quickly, it's reduced. Your times for endurance reduced, power output reduced. So yeah, we're learning more and more just how important it is.
Because it's a big thing for recovery too, isn't it?
Huge. Yeah, it's probably the most important thing for recovery.
Now, I know nutrition diet-wise, I had a gentleman in here a little while ago, Carnivore, swears by it. There's functional diets, there's ancestral. Is there any particular one that you find works and what doesn't work? What are your thoughts around it?
Yeah, so I probably lean in one direction, but I try to stay somewhat agnostic. So I definitely lean more animal-based because I think from a nutrient density perspective, animal foods need to be in the diet. There's no question about that, right? We need B12, we need iron, we need omegas, we need many things that only animals provide. As far as, say, like a carnivore diet and other types of diet approaches, I think they're tools in the tool belt. So for certain individuals with certain presentations, they can be super helpful. And it's also personalized to the individual. So some people, they feel best and operate best on carnivore. Great, do that. I have no qualms with that. But monitor your biomarkers, right? That's the main thing. And so this is the whole aspect of test, don't guess, or be objective and scientific in what you're doing. So there are risks with carnivore, particularly, if you have something called hemochromatosis, where you can end up with iron overload, which can be deadly, really, in the long term. So there's always context involved with it. The caveat to that is, in my personal opinion, vegetarian and vegan diets probably don't fit within my model. I don't think they're necessarily optimal for the human species. I think they can be done. Like some people can manage it, and some people seem to, perform pretty well. But there are certain long-term risks I'd be concerned about, even fracture risk, neurodegenerative disease, sarcopenia, osteopenia. We have very clear evidence that happens if you're not getting in certain nutrients. So you either need to supplement at the wazoo to make it realistic, or you risk potential downside.
Speaking about supplements, what are the ones that you find that we should all be taking, and what are the benefits?
So supplements sort of sits above the foundations. I'll put that caveat first, because I think there's a lot of people that think you can out-supplement a bad lifestyle. And that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, like if you're sleeping 5 hours a night, you're not going to be able to out-supplement it. It will catch up with you. So I'll put that caveat there. But needless to say, I am a fan of supplements for a couple of reasons. One, there is very clear evidence that there are declines in certain nutrients in our food systems. And that's partly due to our agricultural practices. So we've sort of eroded the topsoil, and our soil is becoming more depleted of certain minerals, things like magnesium, et cetera. And I think the stats in the US, somewhere upwards of 50% or more of the population is magnesium deficient now. So for that reason, in the modern day, there's probably a use case for supplementation. Even if you have the best diet in the world, our food simply isn't the same as what it used to be. So that's one aspect. The other is targeted use from an optimization perspective, from a longevity perspective. We've got good data on those. So as far as what supplements can be useful, I kind of have like a baseline that I would recommend for most people. One would be magnesium for the reasons I highlighted. And it's also involved in somewhere upwards of 400 plus sort of metabolic processes in the body. So we need that. Magnesium, fish oil, I think there's very good evidence for as well, but still depends on the dose. I don't go crazy high. 1 to 2 grams of fish oil, I think, is recommended. I'd do a vitamin D, vitamin K2, particularly for the vitamin K2. There's very good evidence for that. And it's another one people don't get. And then perhaps to add in there, either, I'm not a huge fan of multivitamins anymore, but maybe something like a beef organ could be useful as a kind of nutrient dense, natural multivitamin that covers at least some of the basics. And then, you can always layer on more and more supplements.
With your clients, I've become a big fan of the wearables and monitoring all of my data. Is that something that you're a big believer in, and what are the benefits?
Yep. Yeah. So in the biohacking movement, there's the whole quantified self. And so that whole perspective of quantified self is actually getting all the data about you and using yourself as a self-experiment. So it's that personalization. So big fan of wearables. But again, context sometimes matters. I use them a lot with my clients, particularly the performance clients. And the biggest benefit there is monitoring their recovery. So, or the recovery and their stress status. Because for high achievers, high performers, whether it's in sport or whatever, they have a tendency to push. But that can often lead to that burnout presentation or overtraining or overreaching. So we want to balance their training load with their sort of allostatic load of stress. And so I'll use it a lot for that. One of the interesting ones lately has been early screening for sleep apnea. So like the Oura rings and a lot of the new rings now will measure your oxygen saturation. And if you're getting these dips of oxygen while you're sleeping, it could be suggestive of sleep apnea. And it's actually something that goes grossly not misdiagnosed, I'd say underdiagnosed in a lot of people. And so for those who aren't familiar, sleep apnea is basically you kind of stop breathing while you're sleeping. And that's not ideal for your short-term or long-term health. And so sometimes we'll flag that from their wearable data and then send them to their GP and get a sleep study. And sure enough, some people do come back with sleep apnea. So I think things like that can be a game changer as far as early monitoring and screening for conditions. Yep. And then, from the optimization perspective, the more data you have, the better you can improve and optimize.
Yeah. Now you're getting close to hitting the big 4A, I understand.
Yep.
So what's your philosophy on movement, on strength, on training, and particularly for blokes that have got a 4 or a 5 or a 6 in front of their age?
Yeah. I think there's some non-negotiables, and I've got quite a comprehensive philosophy around movement, given my background in martial arts and physio and all those things. But non-negotiables, I think for most people, is going to be bare minimum, at least 2 strength sessions a week, full body strength. You can up that if you've got the time, and 2 cardio sessions. That's non-negotiable, bare minimum. What I like to add into that is some kind of daily movement or mobility. And I think that's something that goes grossly missed, particularly for a lot of the blokes, that they just don't do flexibility, mobility work. And,
I think it's supremely important. I'm a believer. It's strength, endurance, and agility. And like you pointed out, agility seems to be the one that gets missed. And that's the one that comes in handy when you're trying to tie your shoelaces in the morning.
Yep, exactly. And there's another component to that too, which is power. And that's super important to maintain, because the ability to generate power is often what declines first as you age. And that's what leads eventually to falls, broken hips, fractures, and a decline in quality of life. And a lot of people don't necessarily train power, but there's some skill.
Maybe just give our listeners a bit of an example of what you're referring to when you mean by power training versus a strength training.
Yeah. So strength is just your ability to generate force, really. How much force can you generate? Power is how much force can you generate over time, right? So the ability to move very quickly. And that's what we lose. So, your classic kind of power training is going to be your plyometrics, your Olympic lifts, things where you're moving load very, very quick. Or you're moving your own body as the load very quick. Even something as simple as sprinting, right? There's some stats that I think it's somewhere upwards of 90+% of people after 30 never sprint again, which is crazy to me. Like from an evolutionary perspective, if you didn't run and you couldn't run fast, there's a high likelihood you were going to die. So maintaining some of that is really important. And that's just maintaining some of that high resilient tissue, the tendons and the muscles and the bone, all of that. But coming back to the mobility side, I think you're right. Like it goes underutilized. And for me, when I picture, being able to move well into my old age, and maybe this is my old school martial arts background, I picture like that, 90-year-old Asian martial artist who's still like, training and doing the splits up until 100, and he's still moving quick and doing all that. I picture that as the ideal of, where I'd like to be when I'm older. I'd like to be able to move like that and not, struggle to like get out of my chair and everything hurts and stiff. So I spend a lot of time working on my mobility, particularly because I've had, so many injuries due to sport and things. So I probably prioritize that quite a lot.
Can you share with you mentioned earlier that you've had your struggles. Can you share with us a time when you physically hit the wall and what you did to get you through it?
Yeah, I guess there's different approaches to it. I think a lot of athletes can probably reflect and acknowledge having an injury sets you back quite a lot, and that can be hard to come back from. So I had shoulder surgery when I was quite young, and that stopped me from training for a while. And so that's always a bit tough. But yeah, I think mindset wise, you push through it. Harder things, I was in the reserve as well. And so I think probably one of the most difficult things is being sleep deprived for 3 days and still needing to, ruck with a good 30 kilos on your back for however long it takes to get to where you have to go. That type of stuff, that's hard. The sleep deprivation, I think, is one of the most difficult things I've ever gone through.
Yeah. Now, there's a buzzword, longevity, and I know that's obviously a field in which you're playing in. What do you think are the most important keys to unlocking it? Is it a matter of quality over quality, do you think?
I think probably quality over quantity is what I would stress. There's so much out there now, and I think there's a lot of hype and marketing around certain things that don't actually have very good evidence. And a lot of people struggle with the shiny object syndrome. And I think that deviates away from the things that actually improve longevity. And those are the foundations. So a lot of the things we've been talking about, sleep, de-stressing, connection and community, right? Purpose, good food, exercise.
Getting out in the sun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good circadian biology, like all of those things, the research is clear, are the most important. Exercise probably tops that as far as the order of magnitude improvement in not only longevity. And when we talk about longevity, it's good to sometimes clarify the difference between lifespan and healthspan. And so lifespan is how long can you live, right? Which that sounds great. But if you live 100 years and 30 of those years you're in a wheelchair or you're, unwell, that's a pretty terrible life. I wouldn't want to live 30 years like that personally. So that's where the aspect of health span comes in. And that's how well can you live long with good functional health. And so there needs to be a balance between those two. And so the things that improve health span often are super important. And that's where exercise comes in. So making sure that we can actually walk and move around and lift things and get up, making sure we have good cardiovascular fitness to be able to go for a hike, play with the kids. All those things are really important. Then, there's, supplements and all those things. I don't think they really move the needle very much. There are some interesting pharmaceuticals being studied now. Many people are probably familiar with like rapamycin. That looks interesting, but I still don't think it's going to be a panacea, particularly when you compare it to the benefits of exercise, sleeping 8 hours a night, having a sense of purpose, all that type of stuff. Those are the things that are really going to help.
What's your take on hormone optimization, particularly for blokes, again, probably over the age of 40, can see some degeneration in a few areas. So what are your thoughts around that? And is there who should be considering it?
Yeah. So as you said, I'm getting to that 4.0 mark next year. And so I definitely think more about that these days. And I work with a lot of guys who are kind of either on TRT or on the spectrum of potentially needing it. The way I approach it, firstly, evidence is fantastic for testosterone replacement therapy as far as all aspects. So improvement in life, disease reduction. A lot of the early research, showed maybe some potential risks. The newer research has borne that out to not be the case. So it's definitely safe. And from a quality of life perspective, for a lot of guys, can be a complete game changer. So I'm a fan. I think it can be used, but it should be used in a targeted way and an appropriate way. And the other thing that needs to be addressed first, again, coming back to that functional medicine sort of paradigm, is if you have low testosterone, instead of just giving you testosterone to replace it, you have to ask the question why, right? And so that's where I would start first, because if we can fix the underlying why, either your testosterone improves naturally again, and great, we don't need TRT and you feel good, or we see some improvement, but you still need TRT, but you're going to get all the benefits of addressing the lifestyle anyway. So it's a win-win, right? So I think people go to the quick fix first, and they don't address the core underlying issues, which can be a problem too, because, a little testosterone physiology for people here is in men, most of our estrogen is created through testosterone. It gets aromatized by an enzyme aromatase and converted into estrogen. And so for various reasons, men can have increased aromatase activity, particularly if they're overweight, if they have more adipose tissue or fat tissue. There's a lot of aromatase in that tissue. If you just pump in a bunch of testosterone into that system, you could potentially be aromatizing a lot of that and maybe see some detriment due to excess estrogen levels, water retention, moodiness, gynecomastia, other types of issues. So yeah, there's a few things I think that need to be addressed first and reviewed before just jumping on the TRT train.
That's great advice. So you just got to get those fundamentals right. And if you got the fundamentals right, then go and get your biomarkers checked. And if it's necessary, it could be necessary, but maybe not for everyone.
Yep.
I coined the phrase spirit, mind, body. It's one of my philosophies. What's that mean to you? And which one of those do you think's hardest to master?
Yeah, I think, we chatted prior to this, and I think I share in that philosophy of spirit, mind, body. So it's holistically addressing all the areas of your health and well-being. And a lot of people focus on body, right? Nutrition, training. They leave out mind, perhaps, and having good mental health and things there. But a lot of people definitely leave out the spiritual side, which you could say is more just about maybe meaning and purpose and that type of stuff. Personally, it's a toss-up between spirit and mind. I think spirit, for me personally, I've always been very passionate. I've spent a lot of years recently going deep into philosophy and meaning and those things. So maybe I have a better gauge on that, but mind I probably still struggle with. I think maybe it resonates with you. I know a lot of guys maybe sharing the same thing, where I struggle with the concept of being content, but still wanting more and striving for more and being better, and not necessarily appreciating or being happy with what you have. And so I'm constantly battling that a little bit. Like, I like the idea of striving for more and always learning something new and moving on to the next thing. But yeah, sometimes that can leave you in a state of.
I've got a word for that, and that is it's the complacency versus contentment. Like you said, being satisfied with what you've got, but then striving for wanting more. And that's a balance I'm still very much trying to figure out. Yeah. Have you got, what's the biggest health myth that you'd like to debunk for us?
Red meat's bad. Hands down. I'm so tired of hearing that narrative. Yeah, I think, research will continue to evolve. And it's one of the tricky things with, science these days is you can find a paper to support many different claims. But that's one I think that just needs to be put to rest. But maybe I'll be wrong in the long term. Who knows?
So where do you see the wellness industry evolving to over the next 5+ years?
Yeah, I think it's going to be super exciting. I think now with the integration of AI, that's going to completely change how healthcare is done. So the old paradigm of, Peter Attia calls it sort of medicine 1.0, 2.0, the old paradigm of, the doctor, the hierarchy, doing things slowly, not being up to date with the evidence, old ways being held. I think that's going to be completely revamped, and AI is just going to change how we do everything now, which will be super exciting. So I think it's going to move to a more preventative-based model. I think we're going to learn more about how to actually address the chronic disease epidemic. And I think longevity is going to become a much, much bigger industry. There's already a lot of money moving into it, which good and bad. There's probably a dystopian version of everyone living forever. But I think for the most part, it's going to change the paradigm of health a lot, as long as, the old guard doesn't hold on to things for too long. So maybe it'll be 10 years, maybe not 5. We'll see.
What about lessons? Have you? Do you want to share the greatest lesson that you've learned?
Yeah, I think, and this is through different mentors, through books and things. I think probably the best lesson that can apply to everyone is get comfortable being uncomfortable. Hands down. Like if you want to succeed at something, and if you want to improve your health, if you want to change, you're going to be uncomfortable for a bit. And if you're reverted to that, you'll just avoid it. So,
before we rip into the quick fire questions, just thought we'd just summarize a little bit. What do you reckon the 3 most valuable pieces of advice out of what we've discussed today that you'd like to share with our audience?
It can be a lot of different things. I think one, the test don't guess is very important for people who care about their health. You should be doing some annual blood work or getting something measured so that you can see where you're at and potentially catch things earlier. 2, I'd say get clear on what your why is and what your meaning and purpose is, because that's going to shape everything else you do. Right? If that is very strong, you'll be able to overcome whatever it is because you really, really want that. So get clear on that. And the last one I think is what I said there at the end is, get comfortable being uncomfortable. So do uncomfortable things, do hard things, because that's what's going to build your discipline and build that callus so that you can just get on with whatever you need to do.
Mate, great advice. All right, let's rip into these quick fire questions. What's the most underrated health tool?
Can I say sleep?
One thing you're doing differently now that you wish you'd done in your 20s?
More recovery.
All-time favorite movie?
Probably Matrix, or maybe I'd say John Wick.
Worst health advice that you ever heard?
That's a tough one. There's so much bad health advice. Stop eating red meat.
Cold plunge or sauna?
Sauna.
Game-changing biohacking tip for us?
Red light therapy.
What's one thing people always get wrong about fitness?
More is better.
The most powerful supplement that you've personally used?
Perhaps Bromantane, technically not a supplement, more pharmaceutical, but it's kind of in the supplement space.
What's one thing you always say to your clients?
That's a tricky one. It always varies. De-stress.
What's your favorite daily habit or routine?
Walking my dog barefoot with the sun.
Smartest person that you've learned from?
Professor during my undergrad.
A book that's changed your approach to life?
Any book on stoicism.
One thing everyone should be doing right now?
Exercise.
One song that you just have to sing along to?
Above and Beyond, Sun and Moon.
The best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Oh, that one gets me. That's a tricky one. Let's just say anything around discipline.
3 words that describe your philosophy?
I think I thought about this one prior, but let's say nowadays, personally, meaning and purpose, health and vitality, connection and family.
Final question. Finish this sentence. Health is
the one thing that you can't get back if you let it go too long.
Well said, mate. Thank you so much for all of those valuable insights. I'm sure our audience will be much more educated than what they are now, mate. I certainly got a lot out of it, and thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. It was a great chat. Bye.
Cheers. Thanks for tuning in to the M26 Fit podcast. Remember, real growth happens one step at a time, and consistently working both on your mind and your body for 26 minutes every day will change your life. Hit subscribe to keep the inspiration going, and don't forget to share this episode with somebody who needs that extra boost. Until next time, stay connected and stay active.